Hello, welcome to Miss Peepers Reading Corner. I'm Katrina, aka Miss Peepers. We're a little disorganized today, so bear with me. But anyway, welcome. I hope everyone is doing well. Today we're going to talk about, it's on the screen too, but we're going to talk about Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. I just finished reading this book. I tabbed so many things in it, and there's a lot I want to say. Got my notes here, so we'll see if I remember saying all the things that I mean to say. Yeah, so I actually finished a book. It's been a little while. My reading has been a little bit slumped lately. I know I've talked about that in a couple previous videos, which, that works out. That's fine. You do what you got to do. Sometimes you read a lot, sometimes you read a little, and all that matters is that you keep reading. So I did finish this. I'm excited to talk about. And then I also, earlier this week, finished Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler, which I will talk about a little bit next week. I've got some ideas for next week's video. But anyway, let's talk about tuberculosis. First, before I jump in, I do want to give a bit of a content warning, which probably should be obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. We're going to be talking about TB, which means we're going to be talking about illness, both physical and mental. We're going to be talking about some dark stuff, but also, as John Green usually does with his books, there's a mix of hope and despair, and he does so well, and that's one of the reasons I keep coming back to his books, whether they're fiction or nonfiction, as this is. So just be aware of that if that's challenging, if those are challenging topics for you, or if you need to close this at any point, just feel free. I've got many videos that are not about death and illness, so you can watch one of those. So first off, what is this book about? So this was released last month. I don't usually read a lot of brand new releases, but John Green has become an auto-buy author for me, and so here we are. But this is a nonfiction book that is the result of quite a few years of John Green researching tuberculosis, starting with when he realized that it's still a thing, and even though it's a very curable illness, we have treatments for it, we have cures for it, the science is there, it still appears massively across the planet, and so he really wanted to know why. Now, John Green is not a doctor, and he's not pretending to be. He is a writer, and just a general, ongoing student of everything around him, and so he wanted to understand why tuberculosis still exists. And what he found, as the title suggests, is that tuberculosis really is everywhere, not just as a specific illness, but it also has really affected our society, the way that we think about things, our systems, and the way that we treat tuberculosis or don't treat tuberculosis. That is also a reflection of human systems. So there's a lot in here. Obviously, there's the illness itself that he talks about, and he has various individuals with tuberculosis that he talks about throughout the novel, or sorry, throughout the book. Not a novel, this is nonfiction. He talks about health systems and beauty standards and how those are affected by tuberculosis, which I will get to. And he has this really great line. I'm going to read various quotations from this book because I just love John Green's writing anyway. But he says, I started writing about TB because I wanted to understand how an illness could quietly shape so much of human history. And that's really what this book covers. All of those ways that tuberculosis has been in the background of so many things that we interact with and we have no idea. And so one of the things I really liked about this is I learned some things that I'd never heard before. I'd learned some facts about the connections with tuberculosis, and I'm going to share a couple with you. For example, and it's everything from big historical events to small things. So for example, Adirondack chairs, those chairs that you have out on decks, and wineries love to use them. They're kind of these lounge chairs. they were actually invented for TB patients because there was this feeling that if you had TB, you should be outside. And so rather than rolling hospital beds, which is what they did before, Adirondack chairs, they would actually roll the person's hospital bed out onto the patio of the hospital or wherever they were staying, and they created these Adirondack chairs so you could lounge comfortably outside without having to take your entire bed with you. So I thought that was really cool. Just something a little random. But I realized I should probably tell you what TB is, which I kind of take for granted sometimes, because I've been reading this book over the past month and a half. So tuberculosis is, and I'm certainly not an expert, I've read this book, but tuberculosis is a disease that is a bacterial infection that attacks the lungs and the immune system. And in Victorian areas, in the Victorian era, if you watch period dramas or read books from that time period, Victorians refer to it as consumption. And so consumption and tuberculosis are technically the same disease. But one of the things, and this is one of those systemic things that John Green talks about in this book, is that the two names for this illness, for this condition, have completely different connotations. So consumption is this like poet's malady. It's something that afflicts dreamers and is like, a lot of poets have had this, a lot of writers, artists have died of tuberculosis. It is a wasting disease in that it makes it hard for people to eat. It affects people's appetites, and so people lose a lot of weight when they have tuberculosis. They also can't breathe as well. They can't move as well. They tend to have really pale complexions because they can't go outside as much. And it just, so that picture of this like Victorian beauty, or if you think of like Edgar Allan Poe, that kind of beauty, Tim Burton, who was inspired by Edgar Allan Poe, like this picture of the wayfish, very pale, super thin, like wisp of a person, particularly women, but at that time with men as well. This is this beauty standard that still persists today. And it's kind of amazing that that we still think of this illness, the physical effects of this illness still persist centuries after this image of the consumptive. Now, when you talk about tuberculosis, which again is the same thing, but when we talk about tuberculosis, there's this connotation of disease, this connotation of something that has that afflicts people, but that also maybe they brought on themselves. There's Penny back in the background there, little visitation. Tuberculosis has this negative connotation, whereas consumption has this sort of almost positive connotation. And tuberculosis is something that afflicts poor people, usually people of color, whereas consumption affects rich white people. And it's so fascinating, but it's the same illness. It's the same illness with a different name. And because of that, the way that we address that malady, that condition, that illness, is very, very different. As a society, it's very, very different. So when a bunch of rich people were getting consumption, there was a lot of effort into figuring out vaccines and cures, treatments. How do we deal with this? And a cure was found. But when the cure was found, and there are vaccines and there are different things that help prevent TB and cure it quickly when one gets it, if you have access to good health care, which many people in Western countries do, in candidly white countries, and in like people in wealthier areas, you can knock out TB really quickly. Like easy peasy, it's gone. I say that's a bit flip. It's definitely not something. It's something to be taken seriously, but it's curable. You get TB, you get cured, you're good. You move on with your life. But in poorer countries, so when the rich people were all cured, society as a whole was basically like, all right, we're good. We're good. TB's gone, not a problem anymore. But it was still a problem because those cures, those treatments, are incredibly expensive. And so people who live in less wealthy countries, often countries that have predominantly black and brown people, those folks are not as well treated. They can't afford the medication, and even in places where they could afford the medication, a lot of times they can't even get it. And so John Green talks about Sierra Leone, which is a place that he and his brother Hank have done a lot of charitable work, philanthropic work with the organization Partners in Health, and not sponsored, but that'd be great. But he, in Sierra Leone, for example, like the country, the healthcare system can't afford to bring those medications into the country. They can't get them into the country. And so even if an individual could pay for it, which many of them can't, to be really clear, like the medicine isn't there, even though it exists elsewhere on this same planet. And so it's incredibly upsetting the way that we think about something like TB should not be a problem anymore. It really should not. Like, it should be something that we're aware of, that we've wiped out. It should be something that we can prevent, and it is something that is preventable, and yet it still kills millions of people every single year. And even in countries like the United States, the number of cases goes up because of people who don't take vaccines or who don't have as good access to healthcare, because our healthcare system in the US, that's a whole other video that is well outside the scope of this video or even of this channel. But the US healthcare system has a lot of inequities in it as well. And so if you don't have the ability, if you don't have good insurance, if you don't have the ability to pay for treatments, even in the US, it's really expensive. And part of the reason it's so expensive is that once all the rich people were cured, there was never this feeling that, oh, well, we need to make additional treatments, or we need to do more research into how to cure this less expensively or with different options. And so something that John Green talks about in this book is that there are many conditions, many illnesses, maladies, diseases, whatever you want to call them, that have a lot of different types of treatments to approach, different medications, from different companies, from different pharmaceutical companies. That some are, we've got more generic options for a lot of health conditions, but TB just doesn't have that many, and so and it's expensive for no good reason, except that pharmaceutical companies, they charge a lot of money, and I don't know that I want to go fully down that rabbit hole, but John Green definitely does in this book. I do want to talk about a couple of other things, though, that he brings up in here. Speaking of fun facts about tuberculosis, so there was a German doctor named, now I've forgotten his name, Robert Koch, who did a lot of research into tuberculosis and developed a vaccine, and eventually said that he had found a cure. Spoiler, he had not. A cure came later, but he had not found it. But the connection to the bookish world, so Arthur Conan Doyle, who is of course well known for writing the Sherlock Holmes stories, was actually a practicing doctor as well. He was a physician, and so when he heard about this cure that Robert Koch was talking about, he actually went to Germany and tried to meet with the man himself and learn more about this, because he was really interested in it and very excited about this concept of, hey, we can cure this thing. That's great. Well, he never got his meeting. Robert Koch did not meet with him. But Doyle did stay in Germany and study this treatment and do tests on it, and he essentially he learned that it basically killed the treatment killed the tissue that was affected by tuberculosis, removed the tissue, but didn't actually kill the bacteria. And so, as Arthur Conan Doyle wrote about this, he said, "It is as if a man whose house was infested with rats were to remove the marks of the creatures every morning and expect in that way to get rid of them." And then John Green quite eloquently rephrases that as tuberculin, which is the name of the cure, was in the business of picking up rat shit and not in the business of killing rats. And this is so interesting to see those different connections with historical figures, and this idea that tuberculosis really is or has been everywhere in our history. So I loved reading that, just random little factoid. And Doyle did this before he wrote his first Sherlock Holmes story, which of course is what made him internationally famous, and a historically significant person in the literary world. Well, he was also historically significant when it comes to tuberculosis, and I'd never heard that before, which is really fascinating, to me anyway. I love little factoids like that. I will also say that this book talks a lot about despair, as I mentioned. I mean, it's kind of hard not to talk about a disease that is so prevalent and so frustratingly curable that still isn't cured, and without being somewhat despairing. And so I mentioned the beauty standards before, and I don't know if this is going to show up, but he's got some pictures in here of, like, oh yeah, that shows up, of like the consumptive, this beauty, again, this beauty standard from 1857. So it's a print that combined a couple of different media that is called Fading Away, and it's by Henry Peach Robinson. And it's, yeah, this idea of like this beauty standard. And what he says here about it is that it's, while the beauty standards changed, there was still a stigma associated with consumption. And also that it, let me just read the passage. I'll just read the passage. It says, "Small wayfish bodies can now seem so associated with beauty and health that it can feel innate or instinctual to find smaller bodies more attractive than larger ones. But that's not inherent to humanity, and indeed was not a significant bias of humanity until relatively recently, largely because of tuberculosis. That said, it's important to note that the idealization of the small body did not mean the end of consumptive stigmatization. Once again, we see the commingling of romance and stigma in the way women's bodies are imagined, sometimes within a single sentence, as when one 18th century magazine extolled the virtues of the consumptive body type. Quote, "The beauty of women is greatly owing to their delicacy or weakness," end quote. One romantic word to describe the beauty standard, delicacy, followed by its stigmatizing one, weakness. And we still see that today. Actually, just earlier this week, watched the last year's remake of Nosferatu, and the female lead, Ellen, in that movie is very much this like consumptive figure. She doesn't have tuberculosis, or not canonically, and this is even before she is bitten by the vampire. And if you think that's a spoiler, you don't watch vampire movies. But that's, it's, immediately when I saw that, and she's got a lot of scenes where she's just like lounging. She's not lounging, she's ill. She's got mental, she's got epileptic, she has epileptic seizures in the movie. But she also has this connection to the otherworldly, this connection to the supernatural, which is very similar to this like poetic or artistic bent, in my mind. And she's got this, thin, waifish, pale body, and she has this physical weakness, which in the film is also paired with like psychic determination or like psychological grit. And again, it's that dichotomy that they're talking about here. And there's there's a discussion in here a bit about the discussion of the physical form as it is affected by physical illness, by illness. And so John Green talks about a video on tuberculosis where someone commented, quote, "As a fat person, I used to wish for a wasting disease like tuberculosis. It's messed up," end quote. And then he talks about other people have being complimented on their weight loss because that was caused by an illness like a tapeworm or cancer or like tuberculosis, things like that. And this idea of becoming sick in order to look healthy is such a broken part of our society in the way that we think about beauty standards. And like, you'll see me on this video, I am not a small person, and I'm going to be really real here. I have had that thought myself, not specifically tuberculosis, but this idea of like, oh, well, what if there's a physical reason that suddenly I become super thin, or, like that. And I know when I think that when I've thought that in the past, that is not a healthy thing to think, but it's hard not to when that's something that society really pushes. And this idea of like the super skinny waist and the super pale skin, and this, well, I've got the pale skin because I don't like going outside, but the super thin and like wispy look, which is never going to be me. And even if I did lose a bunch of weight, because my build is not that, but also I don't want to be ill. I don't want to be unhealthy, and yet your brain messes with you because of this societal view. And so I did appreciate that John Green touched on that in this book, talking about those beauty standards. And he has also talked about that a bit in some of his videos that he's done leading up to publishing this book, but also some of his promotional videos as well, that he's talked about various aspects and factoids from his research and from this book. And let's see. But I don't want to talk just about despair, because this is ultimately a hopeful story. This is a John Green story. If you're familiar with his fiction, his books tend to be very sad and very have characters that are really struggling or hurting in some way, whether it's physical or mental affliction. Like Turtles All the Way Down, which is about a character who has compulsive thoughts and obsessive compulsive disorder. Like that got me. That's such a it's such a moving book and feels really real. This is nonfiction, of course, but we do follow throughout the book the story of one boy in a Sierra Leonean hospital. His name is Henry, and he has tuberculosis, and he has drug resistant tuberculosis, so it's really difficult to cure. And I won't spoil the ending, but even though it's nonfiction, it's a really interesting journey to follow. But he talks about how even though Henry is sick, he does write poetry, not because his tuberculosis gives him some sort of artistic flair, but rather because he has that artistic flair and is feeling really strong emotions and is writing them down. And so and Green talks about the donations that have been given in the past to help individuals like Henry with their treatments and to pay for things. And And he says, I found it extremely heartening to see all those donations pour into this young man who has too often been neglected and ignored by society. It reminded me that when we know about suffering, when we are proximal to it, we are capable of extraordinary generosity. We can do and be so much for each other, but only when we see one another in our full humanity, not as statistics or problems, but as people who deserve to be alive in the world. And I do think that even though this book and many others of John Green's it is very sad. It is there's a lot of there is a lot of despair. I keep using the word despair. There's a lot of despair in this book. There's a lot of there are a lot of problems that he talks about, and a lot of really difficult things that systemic things that get in the way of people being healthy or getting the care that they need. But throughout it all, I've always had this sense, not just in this book, but in his other books, in his online content, 'cause I follow him on YouTube, and I've always gotten this sense that John Green really does have a lot of faith in the potential of humanity, even when things are grim, when things look grim. And I really love that. And I think that's the way to talk about these things. He does talk about, organizations that are taking action, that are working to do this. And as I said, I follow him on the interwebs. And so, he, even a few weeks ago, went to Congress to talk to various Congress people about funding tuberculosis, about the situations with the the U.S.'s involvement in the World Health Organization, or lack of involvement, because, yeah. If you're watching this real time, it's 2025, you know what I'm talking about. But he still takes those actions and encourages others to do the same. And if nothing else, getting more educated about these topics, that's such a huge step forward, and an understanding of how so many things in our lives are affected by things that we don't even think about necessarily, especially those of us who do live in more privileged places. And like if I got tuberculosis, I would know that I could get a cure for it fairly easily because of where I live and my income and my healthcare, access to healthcare and all of those things, when many people in the world cannot. And so all of that is to say, this book was amazing. I really, really loved it. I highly recommend it if you have any interest whatsoever in this topic. It is written in a way that's really engaging, written in a way that is, it's written for the layperson, by a layperson. It's written not for, it's not a textbook. It's not a super dense collection of dry facts, but it's the information is conveyed through storytelling, which is something that John Green always does really well. And so highly recommend this book, another 5-star from John Green, and I'm so glad I read it. I'm so glad I broke my self-imposed book buying pause to get this book when it came out, because it was well worth it. And we're still doing okay. I only bought one book, in my 6-month book buying ban, self-imposed ban. So we're gonna see if we can stick with just that. It should be another 6 years or so before John Green writes another book, so I should be okay. But let me know if you have read Everything is Tuberculosis. Let me know what you thought of it. Have you read other books by John Green? What do you think of his work? What do you think about his YouTube channel? Whatever it is. What do you think about tuberculosis? Not a fan. But anyway, I hope that everything is going well with you, that you have your own rays of hope, and not too much in the way of despair. And above all, no matter what you do, always, always, always keep reading. We need readers. Keep reading. Have a great one.